crime experts are warning that South Africa is becoming one of the worst assassination capitals in the world. This follows the gunning down of top liquidator Cloete Murray and his son Thomas this past weekend. Cloete was a professional insolvency practitioner working on the Gupta and Bosasa case. We're now joined by Chad Thomas from IRS Forensic Investigations. Chad, thank you very much for coming in this afternoon. We understand that Forensics for Justice has since offered a R1 million reward for any information with regards to this case. Is this something you're aware of?
We have seen this on social media, yes.
Okay, let's maybe get into the business of why we invited you here today. You believe that we run the risk, if we're not already there, in terms of an assassination capital of the world. How did we get there?
The last time I sat in this very chair, in this very studio, was to discuss the assassination of Marumo Eric Pena. Here I'm sitting again a few months later, and we're discussing the assassination of Cloete Murray and his son Thomas Murray. It shows that there are little to no consequences for the actions of these criminals, and we are seeing more and more whistleblowers and crime fighters being assassinated.
Which should suggest what? As you mentioned, a few months later, you're here talking about another assassination, quite brazen at that. When you talk of a lack of consequences, what should that tell us?
It tells us that there's either a lack of interest, no willpower, or there's no capacity or resources to investigate these kind of crimes. I've spoken about this a lot of late, and that's the fact that when one looks at how budget is allocated to priority investigation units, it seems as if they are last in line. The Hawks, for example, only get 2% of the police budget, whereas VIP protection get 3% of the police budget. The police have acknowledged that the Hawks are only 49% capacitated. This is great news for criminals out there, because they know that with the amount of dockets being investigated, there's a good chance that they themselves may never stand trial for these heinous acts.
Help us understand how the ecosystem works, right? Because it's not just the criminals. One is made to understand that this is something much bigger that even touches people at the highest echelons of our society.
It most definitely does. When one looks at murder for hire, contract killings, hits, they've all got these great sounding names. It all comes down to the fact that there are people willing to take out a contract to have somebody killed. And it's becoming more and more prevalent in our country simply because people aren't being held accountable. When one looks at the case of Cloete and his son Thomas, they were well-known liquidators. They perform an essential service in the world of business. Some may say that the Insolvency Act is archaic, it goes back to 1936, but they play an important role. If somebody objects to what they are doing and what they are finding, they can contest it in court. If you have money to hire hitmen to take out people in such a slick hit, you've also got money to hire attorneys to rather fight this. It just shows that as a society we're shifting from doing things the normal way to now doing things in such a barbaric manner.
It's obvious to you that this was a hit in terms of the nature in which it was done. It wasn't an accident. People pulled up next to a car and started firing.
No shadow of a doubt in my mind. And this is one of many cases. We had Wendy Kloppers assassinated in Cape Town recently. She was a Cape Town Metro worker investigating corruption. We had the Babita assassination. I mentioned Marumo Pena earlier. These are high-profile killings, but one must understand there's killings taking place on a daily basis, which are contract-based.
You speak of the capacity of law enforcement agencies and the need for funding to allow them to investigate cases. You can have all the money that you want, but if there's no will, then what's the point? It's like draining that money down.
For me, I'd actually reverse that statement. I'd say if there was willpower, then the funds would be made available. General Lebeer has stood and said he needs to fill 51% vacant posts within the Hawks. That means he has less than half the capacity to investigate priority crimes. Who's ever responsible for budgets needs to make sure he's capacitated. 2% of the police budget going to the priority crime investigation is not indicative of any willpower whatsoever. 3% to VIP protection shows that the priorities are very amiss.
I mean, You do mention that there's killings in South Africa, right? The crime statistics also paint that picture, that ordinary South Africans are also grappling with this. And then yesterday, for the march that we saw in the country, there was such a heavy deployment of the police, of the military, with questions being asked that it would appear that we do indeed have capacity.
I would disagree with you. Having boots on the ground is very different to investigating a crime. In the last 5 years, we've lost 1,000 committed veteran detectives from the police service, people that didn't have the opportunity to transfer their skills. You hear about the minister wanting more boots on the ground, talking about 10,000 a year. That doesn't help the investigation of crime. When you've got an investigating officer sitting with 100 to 200 dockets, it doesn't help that there's a blue line across the road preventing rioters from getting into a building. Those members that wear uniform, they are there for a different purpose altogether. They are there to prevent contact crime. They're there to enforce law and order. When it comes to the investigation of crime, that's where we are seriously lacking. Not in numbers, in terms of skills.
So this... they didn't have an opportunity to transfer skills. I'm sure those 1,000 didn't pass away at the same time. Why are we not having succession plans or skills transfer?
That's the most important question you've asked today. We've got 49% of the posts filled within the most important investigative units in the country. Why are we not seeing more budget? Why are we not seeing more training? And why are we not seeing more people in uniform being trained to take the places of those detectives who are leaving?
Thank you very much for your time
this
afternoon.